If that flight attendant had known her next move would obliterate a $1-2 billion merger and send the entire airline into bankruptcy, she probably wouldn't have done it. But right now, Diane, the name etched on her brass name tag, just stood frozen in the first-class aisle, arms crossed over her chest. She looked down at the young black man in seat 3A as if he were a misdelivered package. Right next to them, the CEO of a major partner corporation took a slow sip of his champagne, casting a dismissive glance at the young man's faded canvas jacket. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice dripping with that signature sweetness of someone who had already sealed her own fate. "I'm going to need you to gather your personal belongings and vacate this seat. We need this space for an actual VIP client." Marcus Cole looked up from his book. Not fast, not slow, he just looked up. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "There's been a slight seating mix-up. We'd like to relocate you to a more appropriate section." She emphasized the word appropriate the exact way people do when they mean something else entirely. The CEO beside her let out a smug smirk, gesturing for airport security to step in. Marcus locked eyes with her for a solid 2 seconds. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. He placed it neatly on the tray table, facing her, and flattened it with his thumb, slowly, deliberately. "I booked this seat 11 weeks ago," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Ale seat, front cabin, row 3. The flight attendant didn't even bother to glance at the pass. That detail is crucial. Remember it, because exactly 6 minutes later, when Marcus makes one short phone call, she and that CEO are about to learn what arrogance truly costs. Pacific. Sky Airlines Flight 419 was scheduled to depart Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 9:14 in the morning, bound for New York's LaGuardia Airport with a full load of passengers and precisely the kind of forward cabin ambiance that airlines spend millions of dollars trying to manufacture. Soft, recessed lighting. Seats upholstered in charcoal gray leather. The faint antiseptic fragrance of something meant to smell expensive. It was the kind of cabin where luggage got stowed without effort and glasses of sparkling water appeared before you asked for them, and the unspoken contract was simple. Everyone here belongs. Except, apparently, Marcus. Marcus Cole was 34 years old and had been traveling for 19 hours straight. He had flown in from Nairobi the previous evening, a quick overnight connection through London, and now he was making the final leg home to New York on what should have been an uneventful domestic hop. He wore dark wash jeans, a faded olive canvas jacket he had owned for 9 years, and a pair of clean white running shoes that had seen better days. His carry-on was a beat-up black duffel with a broken zipper pull. He had replaced himself with a brass key ring. He had a paperback novel open on page 143 and a coffee he hadn't touched yet. He looked, by any external measure, like someone who might be a grad student, or a teacher, or a musician who played small venues and lived on the lower end of the Brooklyn rental market. He did not look like what he was. But that is the whole point, isn't it? His father, a man named Walter Cole, had grown up in Savannah, Georgia, the son of a laundress and a man who fixed other people's cars in their driveway, because he wasn't allowed through the front door of the dealership. Walter Cole had spent his life building something with his hands and his silence, and his refusal to be diminished by anyone who looked at him and saw only the surface. He had built Cole Capital Group from a $4,000 personal loan and 40 years of compounding patience to a private infrastructure investment firm that now held controlling stakes in 3 regional airport terminal operators, 2 cargo logistics companies, and a mid-Atlantic freight rail corridor that moved roughly $3 billion in goods every fiscal year. When Walter passed away 18 months ago, he left everything to his only son. Marcus had never announced it, never changed his clothes, never moved to a different neighborhood. He still got his hair cut at the same barber shop on Atlantic Avenue. He still carried that same broken zipper duffel. Let others wear their money like a name badge. Walter had told him once, sitting on the porch of the house in Savannah, he had never sold. You just know what you have. That's enough. Marcus had kept the canvas jacket his father gave him the day he graduated college. He wore it every time he traveled. It was the only thing about him that anyone should have paid attention to. Nobody did. Diane Pruitt had been a senior flight attendant with Pacific Sky for 17 years, and in those 17 years, she had developed what she privately considered a gift. She could read a first-class cabin in under 90 seconds. She knew at a glance who belonged, who was using miles to upgrade, who would ask for a third refill before they cleared Colorado airspace, and who might become a problem. She had been wrong before. She had never admitted it. She was 51 years old, with a rigid posture and a smile she deployed like a security badge, flashing it just long enough to clear the checkpoint and then putting it away. She had spent her career protecting the cabin from what she called friction. In her private taxonomy of passengers, friction meant anyone who changed the atmosphere she had worked so hard to curate. When Marcus Cole stepped through the forward door at 8:54 a.m., Diane's chin lifted by a fraction of an inch, imperceptible to most people. But the junior flight attendant standing behind her, a 26-year-old named Priya, saw it. She always saw it. She had been watching Diane make that movement for 8 months and had never once found the courage to say anything about it. That was going to become its own kind of weight. Diane had watched Marcus settle into 3A with the unhurried ease of someone who had sat in a seat exactly like it 100 times before. He had not looked around. He had not taken a photo. He had not adjusted every single amenity and called a flight attendant over to ask how the seat reclined. He had simply sat down, opened his book, and existed in the space as though it had always been his. That, somehow, made it worse. Diane had been in the galley when the request came through. Not a request, actually. A demand. His name was Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was the kind of man who announced himself by temperature. He walked into rooms, and they became warmer, louder, more pressurized, as though the air itself had to make room for his certainty about his own importance. He was 58, heavyset, with the complexion of someone who had spent 20 years eating business lunches, and none of them worrying about it. He wore a suit that had cost $3,400 and showed it by the way it pulled slightly at the shoulders, evidence that Gerald had not accounted for the 38 pounds he had added in the last decade. Gerald was the president of Cascade Meridian Shipping, a Seattle-based freight broker that had grown significantly in the last 3 years, largely on the back of a series of favorable loan facilities that allowed it to expand faster than its fundamentals really supported. Gerald did not dwell on fundamentals. Fundamentals were for accountants. Gerald was a relationships man. Gerald knew people. Gerald played golf with the right people and drank with the right people and sat in the right seats. Seat 3A was one of the right seats. He had a deal to close. He had documents to review. He always sat in 3A on the Seattle to New York run because it was the first aisle seat behind the divider, the one with the most legroom, the one where the light hit his laptop screen at the angle he preferred. He had a Platinum Select card with Pacific Sky. He had flown over 340,000 miles on this carrier alone. He did not wait to be greeted. "Where's my seat?" he said to Diane the moment he stepped into the forward galley, his carry-on rolling behind him with a sharp plastic rattle on the carpet. "Mr. Fitch." Diane turned with the practiced warmth she reserved for passengers she recognized. "Welcome back. Which seat did you?" 3A, like always. Diane hesitated. One beat. "Mr. Fitch, we do have a passenger already seated in 3A. There may have been a system conflict during." "A system conflict?" Gerald repeated the phrase with the tone of a man who had never once had patience for other people's explanations. He leaned around Diane's shoulder, looking into the cabin. He spotted Marcus immediately. He took in the canvas jacket, the broken zipper duffel, the paperback. His jaw tightened. "That's my seat," he said. Not to Diane, to himself mostly. Then louder, "Move him." Diane's spine straightened by a millimeter that no one could have measured, but everyone felt. "Of course, Mr. Fitch, let me handle it." She turned toward the cabin, and Priya, standing at the galley counter pretending to organize napkins, pressed her thumb into her palm so hard, the nail left a small white crescent in her skin. She did not say anything. She arranged the napkins into a neat stack. She thought about her lease renewal in 3 months, and the fact that her mother was still on her insurance plan, and told herself it wasn't her place. Some silences are a kind of slow damage. Marcus heard the footsteps before he looked up. 2 sets, one confident, one trailing, apologetic. He placed his finger on the page to hold his place. "Sir," Diane said. She was standing closer than necessary, and her voice carried just enough volume to reach the passengers in 2B and 4C without technically broadcasting. "I apologize for any confusion, but we've had a situation with our seating allocation. Due to a system error, your seat has been flagged as a duplicate booking." Marcus did not look at the boarding pass on his tray table. He looked at Diane. "There's no duplicate," he said. "I booked this seat directly, 11 weeks ago. Confirmation number is on that pass." Diane's eyes did not go to the pass. "I understand, and I want to make this as easy as possible for you. We have a very comfortable seat available in premium economy, row 11, window side, which I think you'll actually find. I'm not moving to row 11. The words came out even and quiet, with no spike of heat behind them. The man in 2B, a software consultant from Portland named Eric, who had been on his phone since boarding, looked up, just briefly, then back down. "Sir." Diane's voice dropped, and something shifted underneath the professionalism, something harder and colder, like stone under ice. "This gentleman is one of our most valued Platinum Select members. He has a business need for this specific seat. I'm asking you to be cooperative." "I'm being cooperative," Marcus said. "I'm explaining that I have a valid ticket for this seat, and I'm not vacating it to accommodate someone whose preference doesn't override a confirmed booking. It's not a preference." Gerald had stepped into the aisle. He had the posture of a man who believed in the particular power of physical presence, the idea that size alone could settle an argument. He looked at Marcus with a kind of flat impatience, the way a person looks at a revolving door that is spinning at the wrong speed. "You're in my seat," Gerald said. "I've been sitting in this seat for 6 years. The crew knows me. The airline knows me. I fly this route twice a month. So I'm going to ask you nicely once, and then I'm going to stop being nice." The temperature in the forward cabin had changed. The woman in 3B, a retired teacher named Gloria, who had been eating a granola bar, stopped chewing. The man in 4A put his magazine down. A toddler in a rear seat made a sound that nobody laughed at the way they normally would. Marcus closed his book. He kept his finger between the pages. "I hear what you're saying," Marcus said, "and I'm telling you that your preference for a seat you've historically used does not create a legal claim to that seat when someone else has booked and confirmed it. If you'd like to resolve the dispute, the gate agent is still at the bridge." Gerald's face did something complicated. The flat impatience became something hotter and less controlled. "You know what?" he said, pulling his own boarding pass from his jacket pocket and waving it loosely. "I'm not interested in a civics lesson from someone who—" He paused. The way people pause when they've started a sentence they know they shouldn't finish. Someone who clearly doesn't understand how this works. The cabin understood what the pause meant. The cabin said nothing. Gerald turned to Diane. "Get the purser. Get the captain if you have to. I want this resolved before we push back." Diane's face held its position. "Of course, Mr. Fitch. I'll speak with Captain Hargrove." She turned and moved toward the cockpit without a backward glance at Marcus. Marcus opened his book again. His coffee was still warm. Here is what nobody in that cabin knew about Marcus Cole. 11 months ago, Cole Capital Group had quietly and through a series of carefully structured intermediary vehicles acquired a 34% strategic equity stake in Meridian Air Partners, the parent holding company of Pacific Sky Airlines. The acquisition had been conducted entirely through nominees and blind trusts, as was Walter Cole's preferred method, the one Marcus had inherited along with everything else. Cole Capital did not appear in any Pacific Sky filing that a person would casually find. The name existed 3 layers deep in an SEC disclosure document that required a specialist to excavate. Meridian Air Partners was also, at this precise moment in corporate history, in the final stages of a $680 million capital refinancing arrangement. The arrangement involved 7 institutional lenders. Cole Capital was the anchor investor, committing $220 million of the total structure. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Marcus did not call his attorney. He did not call his CFO. He called one person. The name in his phone was listed simply as Raymond. Raymond Chu was the chief of staff at Cole Capital Group. He was 39 years old, had a law degree from Columbia and an MBA from Wharton, and he had worked for Walter Cole for 11 years before Walter passed and for Marcus for 18 months after. He did not panic. He did not make noise. He solved problems the way a surgeon closes an incision, with precision and with the minimum intervention required to achieve the intended result. When Raymond's name lit up the caller ID from an in-flight number, he answered on the second ring, "Mr. Cole. I didn't expect to hear from you until this evening." Raymond. Marcus kept his voice low. In the forward cabin around him, people were doing the thing people do when they want to eavesdrop without appearing to. Very small, very still, very interested in objects 2 inches from their faces. "I'm on Flight 41 We haven't pushed back yet. I want to walk you through a situation." "Go ahead." Marcus laid it out, methodically, without editorial. The seat request, the claimed system error, Gerald Fitch, the language used, the Diane, the way the boarding pass had been ignored. Raymond's keyboard began to move. "Gerald Fitch," Raymond said, "president of Cascade Meridian Shipping." Apparently. "Give me 45 seconds, the keyboard continued. In the galley forward, Diane was speaking in low tones to someone Marcus couldn't see. Gerald had moved to the galley entrance, arms crossed, watching the cabin like he expected a settlement to emerge from the carpet. "Cascade Meridian," Raymond said. "They have a $47 million accounts receivable facility with Shoreline Capital Partners." "Shoreline is one of our holdings," Marcus said. "Yes, I know. Their facility comes up for the annual review in 6 weeks." A pause. "Mr. Cole, what would you like to do?" Marcus considered the question. He watched Gerald Fitch shift his weight from one foot to the other, glancing over at Marcus with the expression of a man who had never seriously entertained the possibility of losing. "Nothing yet," Marcus said. "But I want you to pull everything on Cascade Meridian. Full review. Financial filings, covenant compliance, liability disclosure. Everything. Full review." "Understood." "And Raymond." Marcus's voice stayed even. "I'd like you to take a look at the Meridian Air Partners refinancing documents. Specifically, the corporate governance representations. A beat." "You're thinking about a pause?" "I'm thinking about what it means," Marcus said, "when a company's senior, on-the-ground personnel make discriminatory demands in service of a passenger's comfort in a situation with witnesses, and the institutional response is to facilitate rather than correct it." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll have a full briefing ready for you within the hour," Raymond said. "And Mr. Cole, do you want me to contact the airline's executive office directly?" "Not yet," Marcus said. Let's see how this develops. He put the phone down on the tray table, face up. Gerald had been watching. He hadn't been able to hear the conversation, but something about the quality of it, the lack of apology, the absence of any anxiety, had produced a thin thread of unease that was beginning to pull at the edges of his certainty. "Who were you talking to?" Gerald asked. Not the aggressive version of the question, a slightly smaller version. "My office," Marcus said simply. "Your office?" Gerald repeated it, the way people repeat something when they're trying to hear it differently. He did not get a second chance to sit with that question, because at that moment, Diane returned from the galley area with a man behind her who was not the captain. He was the purser. His name tag read Stefan. He was in his early 40s, carrying the weary authority of a man who has managed too many of these situations and would like very much to not be managing another one. Diane pointed at Marcus. "This is the passenger in question." Stephen looked at Marcus, then at the boarding pass still sitting on the tray table, then at Gerald standing in the aisle with his carry-on still attached to his hand like it was part of his arm. "Sir," Stephen said to Marcus quietly, "I apologize for the disruption. I've been asked to." "Before you can continue," Marcus said, "I'd like you to look at the boarding pass." A beat. Stephen looked at it. His eyes moved across the confirmation number, the seat assignment, the timestamp. Then he looked up at Diane. Something moved across his face. Not quite accusation, closer to understanding. "Mr. Fitch," Stephen said, turning to Gerald with a careful neutrality, "I want to confirm your booking for this flight. Do you have your pass?" Gerald produced it. Stephen looked at it, took a breath. "Mr. Fitch, your assigned seat on this flight is 5C. The word landed like a drop tray. 5C, Gerald repeated. "Yes, sir. That's a forward economy aisle seat. The 3A assignment on your historical profile was not carried forward on this booking. That's the record as it stands." Gerald's face moved through approximately 4 expressions in 2 seconds, none of them good. "That's absurd. I always fly 3A, your system." "The system assigned you 5C for this booking, sir. That's what we have." "Then your system is wrong. I understand your frustration." "Don't." Gerald's voice cracked up in volume like someone had turned a dial. The granola bar woman in 3B flinched. The man in 4A picked up his magazine and held it in front of his face. "Don't give me the script. I have flown 340,000 miles on this airline. I have a Platinum Select card. I am telling you that I sit in 3A, and that—" He pointed at Marcus now, directly the way you point at something that doesn't have feelings, does not belong in that seat. The word belong hung in the recycled air of the cabin for what felt like a very long time. Priya, visible now from where she stood at the galley curtain, felt her hand on the fabric tighten. A woman 2 rows back, mid-30s, in a green blazer, had stopped pretending to look out the window. She had her phone tilted at a specific angle in her lap. Stephen drew a breath. "Mr. Fitch, the passenger in 3A has a confirmed booking with a valid boarding pass for that seat. I'm not in a position to reassign him. I'd be happy to show you to your seat in 5C, and I can offer you a complimentary premium beverage service." Gerald stared at him. "Get me the captain." "Sir, the captain." Captain James Hargrove was a 23-year veteran of Pacific Sky and a man who had navigated a decompression event over the Pacific, a bird strike on approach to Denver, and a passenger medical emergency that had required him to divert to Bismarck, North Dakota in December. He had handled all 3 with the methodical calm of someone who was paid to solve problems that other people couldn't solve. He was not, in his private assessment, paid to adjudicate seat disputes. He stepped out of the cockpit with a pre-flight checklist in one hand and the specific expression of a man whose pushback window was now in jeopardy. He assessed the scene in under 5 seconds. A large man in an expensive suit standing in the aisle, a visibly agitated Diane, a controlled-looking Stephen, and a young black man seated in 3A, reading a book with the contained composure of someone who had decided long ago not to perform distress for other people's comfort. "What is the situation?" Captain Hargrove said. Not a question, a command that sounded like one. Gerald spoke first, 4 sentences, delivered with the urgency of someone submitting a claim. His seat, his status, his history. This individual, and the word "this" was doing a lot of work, was in it. Captain Hargrove looked at Marcus. "Sir, I'm Captain Hargrove. Can you tell me your name and your booking status?" "Marcus Cole," Marcus said. "Seat 3A. Confirmed booking. Boarded correctly. My boarding pass is on the tray table. Stephen has already confirmed the booking is valid." Captain Hargrove looked at Stephen. Stephen gave a small, unambiguous nod. The captain looked at Gerald. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly, in a direction that was not favorable to Gerald. "Mr. Fitch," Captain Hargrove said carefully, "your assigned seat on this flight is 5C. I understand that's not what you expected, and I apologize for any confusion in the booking process. But the passenger in 3A has a valid claim to that seat, and I'm not able to displace him. This is absolutely Mr. Fitch." The captain's voice went one notch quieter, which in operational terms meant one notch more serious. "We are 11 minutes from pushback. I need this cabin settled. If you'd like to file a complaint regarding the seating assignment, our customer relations team will address it after landing. Right now, I'm asking you to take your assigned seat." Gerald Fitch stood in the aisle of a Pacific Sky aircraft at 34,000 feet of altitude he hadn't yet reached, and felt the specific humiliation of a man who has never learned to hear the word no. "You'll be hearing from my attorney," Gerald said. Nobody responded to that. He picked up his carry-on and walked, stiffly, toward 5C. Diane remained in the forward galley. She had not, in the entire course of this encounter, once looked directly at the boarding pass on Marcus's tray table. Captain Hargrove paused at 3A on his way back to the cockpit. He looked at Marcus. "My apologies, Mr. Cole," he said. "Have a good flight." "Thank you, Captain." Hargrove went back to his cockpit. The door closed. Marcus picked up his coffee, still warm. He thought about his father. He thought about a man who had driven other people's cars to their driveways because he wasn't allowed through the front door. He thought about how much had changed and how much had not changed, and how the weight of both of those things lived in the same body. Then he took a sip of his coffee and found his page again. Somewhere over Idaho, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Raymond. It was a summary, 14 bullet points, formatted the way Raymond always formatted things, clean and without drama, which somehow made it more unsettling. Cascade Meridian Shipping. FY results showed revenue growth of 22% with operating margin compression of 8 points. Receivables aging had deteriorated significantly. Covenant compliance on the shore facility showed 2 technical breaches in the last quarter, flagged internally but not disclosed in the most recent lender report. The non-disclosure was not an accident. It was a pattern. There were 3 prior instances in the last 2 fiscal years. Raymond's note at the bottom read simply, "Your call." Marcus set the phone down and looked out the window at the flat brightness over the mountains below. Then he typed back 3 words, "Escalate to disclosure." That meant Shoreline Capital would be notified of the covenant breach and the pattern of non-disclosure, which meant Cascade Meridian's $47 million credit facility, which was their operational lifeline, would be subject to an immediate review and likely a 90-day acceleration notice, which meant, in very practical terms, that Gerald Fitch's company would be in a liquidity crisis before the week was out. Marcus did not feel triumphant about this. He felt something quieter and sadder. He was not destroying something healthy. He was simply turning on the lights in a room that had been dark for a long time, and whatever was in the room had been there long before he flipped the switch. Gerald had not created this problem on an airplane. He had just given Marcus a reason to look. At Pacific Sky Airlines corporate headquarters in Seattle's So-Do district, the SVP of operations, a woman named Claire Donovan, received 3 communications within a 90-minute window on the day of Flight 419 that together constituted the worst professional afternoon of her 11 years with the company. The first was a message from Stephen, the purser on Flight 419, filed through the crew incident reporting system, documenting the full sequence of events in 3A, with specific reference to the language used by both Diane Pruitt and the passenger Gerald Fitch. Stephen's report was precise and unsparing. He had been writing it in the galley on his tablet during boarding, because Stephen had learned in his 14 years of flying that the only thing worth less than a verbal account was nothing at all. The second was a notification from Pacific Sky's social media monitoring team. The woman in the green blazer, whose name was Nina, and who worked in corporate communications for a healthcare nonprofit and knew exactly what she was doing when she angled her phone, had posted a 93-second video to 2 platforms. The video showed Gerald Fitch standing in the aisle, pointing at Marcus Cole, and the word belong captured in clear audio at the 11-second mark. By the time the plane landed at LaGuardia, the video had 1 million views. By the following morning, it would have 11 million. The hashtag that attached itself to the story was short and unambiguous, and it lived at the top of trending lists across 4 different platforms for 36 consecutive hours. The third communication was a message from Meridian Air Partners General Counsel, notifying the executive team that Cole Capital Group had formally requested a temporary pause on the $680 million refinancing pending a governance review. The message included 1 line of context that General Counsel had been told to include verbatim. The review had been initiated following an incident on Flight 419 on this date, in which a Pacific Sky senior flight attendant facilitated discriminatory treatment of a Cole Capital principal. The principal in question was the anchor investor in the refinancing. Claire Donovan read all 3 in sequence, then sat in her chair for a moment, looking at the wall. Then she picked up the phone and called the CEO. Gerald Fitch landed at LaGuardia at 4:47 in the afternoon and turned his phone off airplane mode with the confidence of a man expecting good news. What he received instead was 41 missed calls, a cascade of texts from his CFO and board members, and a voicemail from Shoreline Capital Partners' relationship manager, left in a tone that was professional and devastating in equal measure, informing him that the facility was under formal review effective immediately, and that a meeting was required within 48 hours. He stood at the baggage carousel in Terminal B and read the texts one by one. His CFO had written, "They know about the covenant breaches. All 3 of them. I don't know how." His board chair had written, "Gerald, we need to speak today. This is serious." His outside counsel had written, "Do not speak to any lenders without me present. Call me now." Gerald Fitch sat down on the plastic bench near the carousel, and he sat very still. Around him, LaGuardia continued to operate with its specific mid-afternoon chaos. Rolling suitcases and announcement chimes and children and delayed flights and the whole grinding, indifferent machinery of people going places. None of it cared, none of it slowed. He thought about the man in the canvas jacket. The book on page 143. The way Marcus Cole had not flinched when Gerald pointed at him. He had assumed, without a single moment of actual examination, that the person sitting in his seat was someone who had no recourse, someone who could be displaced by the sheer fact of Gerald's certainty about his own position in the world. He had been wrong with a specificity that was going to be very expensive. Diane Pruitt received her notification differently. She was in the crew hotel in Midtown, having checked in after the post-flight debrief when her union representative called. The representative's name was Frank, and Frank had handled dozens of grievances and several terminations in his 19 years in the role, and he had never once called a member with a voice like this. "Diane, I need to tell you something before you see the news. There's a video she already knew. She had seen a notification flash on her phone in the elevator and had not opened it. Frank walked her through it. The video, the coverage, the social media metrics that had turned her face and her voice, and the word appropriate into something seen by millions of people who all understood exactly what she had meant. Then he told her about the letter from Pacific Sky's legal team. Pending suspension, pending investigation. Diane had 17 years of service, a spotless official record, and something else, a pattern. 3 prior complaints, all from passengers of color in the forward cabin, all flagged in the system, all closed with insufficient follow-through by a supervisory structure that had been too comfortable with her for too long. The pattern was now documented in a report that had been compiled in under 6 hours by a legal team that understood what was at stake. Frank said, very gently, that the union was unable to intervene. The video was too clear. The pattern was too established. He was sorry. Diane sat on the edge of the hotel bed in her uniform, holding the phone after the call ended, and for the first time allowed herself to truly see this moment she had walked past that boarding pass without looking at it. She had not looked at it because she had already decided. She had made the decision before Marcus Cole had finished walking through the door. The boarding pass was not a document. It was an inconvenience. Evidence was only evidence if you were willing to see it. She had spent 17 years telling herself she was protecting the cabin. She had not protected anything. She had just chosen, over and over, who deserved to be protected. The refinancing on the Meridian Air Partners deal was paused for 11 days. During those 11 days, Pacific Sky's executive team completed an internal review and terminated Diane Pruitt's employment with cause, which under the terms of her contract meant forfeiture of a significant portion of her pension benefits. 3 other complaints were formally reopened. A new training protocol was announced, though the word training was doing too much work for what was actually a structural accountability system that required evidence documentation for any mid-flight seating dispute. Cascade Meridian Shipping entered formal negotiations with its lenders on day 9. Gerald Fitch resigned the following Monday, citing personal reasons in a statement that his PR team wrote in 40 minutes. The real reasons were contained in the Shoreline Capital Recovery Notice, which documented 3 separate instances of material misrepresentation in financial covenant compliance reporting, each of which constituted fraud under the applicable loan agreement terms. Cole Capital reinstated the refinancing on day 12, with 2 new conditions: board-level representation and a passenger rights compliance audit. Stephen, the purser, submitted a commendation nomination for Priya, the junior flight attendant, who had finally, on the ground at LaGuardia, given a statement to the crew incident investigator. Her statement was 1 page, handwritten, and it described 8 months of watching Diane Pruitt make the small chin-lift movement in the forward cabin and saying nothing. She described it not to excuse herself but to explain what silence costs when it compounds. The investigator noted that her account corroborated the pattern documentation. She kept her job. She asked to be transferred to a different crew rotation. Nobody blamed her. Marcus Cole was in his office on the 31st floor of a building on Lexington Avenue when Raymond set the final settlement summary on his desk. The office was quiet. The desk was a simple walnut surface with a single monitor and a family photograph that faced inward toward Marcus so only he could see it. It showed Walter Cole in Savannah, sitting on the porch of the house he never sold, wearing a Sunday shirt and smiling at something off to the left of the frame. Whoever was holding the camera, you couldn't see, had gotten the light exactly right. Marcus read through the summary. He initialed 3 documents. He handed the folder back to Raymond. Then he took the canvas jacket off the back of his chair and set it on the desk in front of him, smoothing the worn fabric with his palm. A week before Walter died, Marcus had flown home to Savannah. They had sat on that porch for 4 hours. And Walter had told him about the time in 1987 when he had walked into a bank in Savannah to apply for a business loan, and the loan officer had looked at him for exactly as long as it took to form a conclusion, and then slid the application back across the desk without reading it. "I walked out," Walter had said, "went to the next bank, walked out of that one too. Third one, same thing." He had been looking at the yard, at the old pecan tree in the corner. "Took me 11 months and 14 banks before I found someone who would look at the numbers instead of looking at me." Marcus had asked him if he was angry. Walter had thought about it for a long time. "I was," he finally said. "But angry is like a leak. If you don't fix it, it drains you until there's nothing left to run the engine." He had reached over and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder for a moment. "Fix the leak. Keep the engine running. That's all." Marcus sat in the office on Lexington Avenue and thought about that. He thought about a boarding pass lying on a tray table that someone had refused to look at. He thought about the weight of being looked through, the specific exhaustion of it, the way it accumulates, not in rage, but in a quiet and constant spending of energy just to remain whole when the world keeps trying to tell you that you're worth less than the surface you present. He picked up the jacket, put it on. He had a dinner meeting in an hour. He would wear this like he always did. And somewhere in the back of his mind, like a low, clear note, he heard his father's voice. "Keep the engine running. That's all." The story of Marcus and his father is more than just a snapshot of injustice. It holds a profound truth about human worth and the realities of life. We often find ourselves facing the heavy weight of prejudice, a world that tries to label and measure us by the clothes we wear, the skin we are in, or the shallow surfaces we present. Yet, your true worth never belongs in the eyes of someone else. It lives in the numbers inside you, your talent, your character, and your unyielding grit. When the world treats you unfairly, hurt and anger are only human. But nursing that resentment is like letting a slow leak drain you until there is nothing left to run the engine. Walter's greatest lesson is the wisdom to patch that leak, to channel that pain into purpose, and to protect the energy you need to keep moving forward. At the same time, this story forces us to look in the mirror. Have we at some point been the loan officer or the passenger on that plane? Have we been the ones who judged too quickly and looked away before ever trying to truly see the person in front of us? If these words touched a quiet place in your heart, or if you saw yourself or someone you love in this story, please like and share it today. Let's pass this message along like a warm embrace. A reminder to anyone out there who feels weary, unseen, or is doubting whether they belong in a room they have every damn right to be in. Please, leave a comment and share your own story. Have you ever been the one fighting forward in that canvas jacket? Or have you ever been the one who refused to look at the boarding pass? Speak your truth. I am right here to read, listen, and honor every single one of your stories.